What's up, everyone? I hope you had a wonderful weekend. It's Josh here with NoBS Trading. You might see that we don't have an intro for this video, and I might not even have the new cover photos done. But nonetheless, I wanted to put out a video, kind of cover what happened over the weekend and how things have been changing in the geopolitical environment. Because we've seen lots of new sanctions come out from Russia and Ukraine. I do not expect these to slow anytime soon, and the market's starting to realize how far out these ripple effects go when it comes to the different sanctions that have been done. And that's, as we've said many times on different social platforms, with the oil prices increasing, which everyone's definitely noticed. I've definitely seen lots of social media posts. People are starting to realize that this is hurting them at home as much as not as much as it is in Russia, but as much as it is maybe in some of the European countries as well. And you have to think, remember, we're pretty much energy independent here in the US, generally. But as far as Europe goes, they have massive dependence on different global players like Russia. So the effects they're feeling are even worse than the ones we are. The last time we talked, we covered what was going on with the nuclear reactors. Now, it turns out that a lot of that was exaggerated by President Zelensky. And honestly, I can't be much of a critic of him when I consider, what he's handling. He wants the UN to step in and help with the situation. He understands Ukraine can't defend itself, although the defense that they've mounted so far has been just it's been extremely impressive. I think lots of military strategists are universally surprised by how well they've been able to hold back the Russian forces. And, we've even seen civilians pitch into this, which I, don't want to be too quick to celebrate. Overall, you have to remember from the populace of both these countries, Russia and Ukraine, are both being negatively affected by everything going on. The sanctions hit both of them, and the conflict does as well. Russia isn't all Putin. Not everyone's like pro Putin. Not everyone buys the Russian propaganda. We've seen lots of protests, lots of arrests, and even a YouTube video I shared with a Russian YouTuber who was talking about the situation, how he had no access to his bank accounts, couldn't even use MasterCard or Visa, and we've seen lots of companies pull out their services in Russia as well. And obviously there's so much chaos in Ukraine, I doubt any of that's functioning there either. Now keep in mind with some of these companies, this is completely just virtue signaling. They didn't have much business there anyways. And so now they're using this moment to show that, hey, we support Ukraine, but the net effect of what they're doing is next to nothing. So also don't be too quick to assume that such and such company is this great moral leader. I just am very adverse to that type of mindset. Just want to throw that out there. But anyways, let's cover some more important things that have been going on. So the ripple effects, obviously, are widespread. And lots of people keep asking me what I think is going to happen next with this market. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think anyone really knows. So, and one of the things I explained in the newsletter that I'd like to touch on a little bit more here is what the stock market essentially is. It's trying to solve the problem of pricing every single asset in real time all at once. So to do that, you try to have as many participants as possible helping to find the prices of those assets. And that is what the stock market is. It is supposed to be our tool to figure out what the widespread effects of this are. So during this time period, I would expect lots of volatility, lots of different narratives and discussions around wheat prices or lithium prices or oil prices or nuclear or uranium prices. Like this will all, or gold or silver or crypto, this will all take a substantial amount of time to play out. And remember, we're not done with these sanctions. These sanctions are likely to continue. As far as the actual conflict goes and seeing those tensions come up, I think we're going about the right path. I worry about the sanctions because it's clear they're hurting citizens more than they are the Russian oligarchs or the elites who actually do the decision making to go to war, such as Putin himself. And there's maybe some expectation that this leads to revolt within Russia. If you hurt the overall populace enough that they'll then revolt against the dictatorship, I think that this is still very unlikely. I don't see it happening. Now, if you hit the oligarchs hard enough, then maybe they put pressure on Putin. But if you're just hurting the general populace, this is purely speculative, to be honest, but I don't think it'll actually correlate to revolution. This has actually been also reflected in some of the different Russian commentators on YouTube. Granted it is YouTube, but these people live in St. Petersburg is one in particular that I shared on YouTube. But I've also been touching on different channels, just different outlets that are separate from mainstream media, right? So because propaganda is a thing and it's literally everywhere, as we saw with the nuclear reactor, which I think is just another participating factor to why all of this seems to be great fundamental basis for the necessity of crypto. And when it comes to even monetary support, the crypto donations that we saw go towards Ukraine was even greater than what the UN allocated to them. Now, of course, they also gave them different resources, whether that be, military equipment or food or, a way to escape, or places to stay for refuge. But we were talking about strict money that was just sent to them. Crypto donations actually led. So, in my opinion, this just shows like the more you empower the individual to do good, the more good they can do. When it's not just a government who can provide aid, but the average person can say, you know what, I'm gonna send them 0.2 of my Ethereum to help support that. When you do that, when you crowdsource that, I think you just unlock more of the human potential. And this is just part of my fundamental basis for crypto. And I think that even though you haven't seen this reflected in the price action of some of these cryptos, especially since these people are usually getting these and then selling them for fiat currencies, realize that effect won't occur in the future, right? Because the actual currency that you're being sent is the currency that you use for purchases. And this also does put an argument that economic sanctions aren't as much of a factor because it's going to be harder to block countries off of that base. So that maybe we actually have a loss of a tool as far as negotiation terms go. So probably a wider narrative to be had there. Overall, though, I think it's a net good. And that's important because there's also lots of negative things that occur because the internet exists, like propaganda, mass propaganda, or even cancel campaigns, which sometimes are also good, I guess, depending on how you look at it or what the specific situation is. Remember, there's so much nuance here. I don't take my widespread commentary and then pair it with some sort of specific new instance and then say, oh, he's not, acknowledging this. And it's like, yeah, there's a bunch of those, but I'm talking about the more general consensus, what we're going to hit the most, right? The net effect. It's going to be some negatives, but I'm thinking the net effect is a positive, right? So that's the way I'm kind of analyzing that. And so when I'm analyzing it from the fundamental balance of are we able to do a greater net good rather than the negatives that this also causes, I still see it there. I think the base case is there. And I think it'll only be a matter of time before people start to realize that. And I do think that, things like Bitcoin, as I've said before, are great alternatives to things like gold and bonds. And I do expect that this will slowly pick up in the narrative and interest over the course of the year. Granted, I highly doubt the lows are in. And I think there could be a lot more selling, a lot more panic, because a lot of governments are going to see this as a threat to their main route for negotiations at this point. They're trying to get Russia to back down. If Russia starts to utilize crypto as a way to escape these sanctions, and it is successful, which we have not seen, by the way, we have not seen actually a government actually do that. Nor have we seen really an indication that Russia's doing that. We got an update last week on their holdings in Bitcoin. It wasn't that significant whatsoever. So there's no indication that is actually occurring. But if it did, and I think that's some of the fear, we could see crypto under attack. Now, I think it's maybe like a 1% chance that they actually find a way to, take it down entirely. I don't see that occurring. Now, attacks on crypto wallets, etc. We've covered this before. I think that's important. Please make sure that you not only diversify your risk and your positioning, but also diversify your risk and your protections when it comes to cybersecurity and keep everything on lock, right? Brokerages have some of the best security that you can possibly have. It's oftentimes going to be better than whatever online algorithm is keeping your holdings safe. So keep that in mind. Make sure you do your due diligence on that. You know, this is no recommendations here when it comes to who you should operate with. I can only speak to who I operate with and where I like to keep my holdings, which is with Coinbase. And I've actually taken everything on my Coinbase wallet and even just put it right with the brokerage. So, in Gemini, I also have some crypto in Gemini, and I might have some with crypto.com. I think I took that out. Anyways, so let's backtrack. Conflict with, will Russia break out in conflict with the UN? I don't think so. I think they're handling this appropriately. And, we talked about the sanctions affecting the people more. I don't think that'll play out how they want it to, but I think we're making the right move by bolstering our forces in the UN. I think we need to keep those borders strong. We need to make it clear to Putin that if he makes a further move, that we will end it quickly. If he starts something with the UN, he needs to have no reason to think that he can have any success in pushing this advancement any further, because it is looking like just seizing Ukraine could have been the only goal. I know, and it also seems like, he has no real exit here. There's no real end goal here. That is very obvious. And I've seen lots of people speculate. One of the things that I think is missing from the conversation is the demographics that are at play here. There's more 50 and 6-year-olds alive in Russia than there are 20 and 30-year-olds. This really does put a bunch of economic pressure on them. This puts a bunch of economic pressure globally, in fact. This is an issue that we have here in the U.S. as well. It exists in Canada. It's a huge issue in China as well. And it's something you have to definitely consider when you think about China invading Taiwan. This is part of what's at play with Russia making this move on Ukraine. The demographics of these populations are extremely deflationary on their economies and the growth rate that they can continue to see. Russia can never become a superpower in the state that it's in if its population continues to decline at the rate at which it is. And so this may be something that China is also considering. Like, you need young people, especially when, here in the U.S. we have systems like Social Security and Medicare. These are supported by taxes of people who are still in the workforce. The issue here is that when the boomer generation and the older generations are larger than the smaller generations, they have to become more exponentially productive to pay for the taxes that support the older generations, who also have a growing amount of needs as they age and their health declines, right? And with inflation as well. So then it becomes more expensive to support their greater needs with a smaller population, which makes innovation just not something that you strive for, but something that becomes an absolute necessity to support the populace. Or else you have a complete destabilization of society and a financial collapse. And that's one of the base arguments behind the retirement crisis. And one of the things that we'll also talk about in a future upcoming educational video when it comes to globalization and setting a macro framework and understanding that people are always more important than money. Something I've iterated, many, many times before, whether it comes to analyzing companies and focusing on management teams, the decision making that they'll make and how they plan their longevity over their profit growth, So, but at the end of the day, a deflating populace is going to be a stronger factor than an inflation of prices, which is why, last year when we had that big conversation about inflation being transitory, I was like, well, of course it's transitory, because we have a deflating population. There's nothing you can do to offset that to the extent that something monetary would be a greater effect than the actual number of people. Now, unless you had massive innovations, which we've been hindering through our monetary policies. So in the way of like energy prices, which should be lower because of nuclear energy, but are now much higher because we haven't utilized those technologies to help support ourselves. Instead, we've relied on things like oil, which, obviously prices have been skyrocketing. And we wouldn't see any of that effect if we had set up infrastructure more like France. So there's something to consider. And so when we're looking at the future, we're keeping in mind that conflict could be more on the rise because of this deflationary effect on the populations. These countries might panic. They might feel like they need to make a move or collapse. And remember, their main goal is to maintain power, be global players. They want to have sway on the global narrative, on the way cultures develop, on everything. They want to have as much control as they can possibly obtain. And some of them, like Putin, have this type of religious doctrine that they believe they are destined to become a global leader. And this, just kind of gets scary when you start to think about that factor. Putin was quoted literally saying that if there is no Russia, then why should there be a rest of the world? Okay, so when I say that I think we're doing the right thing to prevent further development of conflict, I also do think we need to find some sort of way to give him some sort of win to incentivize him to exit this. A great quote I heard when I was listening to all kinds of different resources about what's going on is build your enemy a golden bridge to retreat on. And I definitely think that we need to build Putin a golden bridge to leave on. Because right now, what does he walk away with? And I'm not saying that we should placate to our enemies, but I'm just saying that if you don't want this to further develop into a situation like Germany, where even if they walk away now, we've crippled them so badly economically that whoever rises to power, whoever stays in power, will become so resentful that they'll want vengeance. Vengeance is what drove World War II. Was this economically crippled Germany was able to be completely hypnotized by this charismatic leader who then went on a path of brutal destruction and genocide. And when you economically cripple Russia and then don't care about affecting the general public, like you're only gonna later on pay the consequences for how these people are gonna psychologically feel after that. And I just worry about us being so heartless towards an enemy, because I just think the situation overall is more nuanced than that. And I don't see the general Russian populace as holistically just enemies who are evil. I think a lot of them who even have the opinion that they should have invaded Ukraine are just being enticed by propaganda. And oftentimes when you see people like this, when you sit down and you talk to them and explain to them the situation and you understand, just who they are, suddenly you can break down those barriers just so quickly, just through simple communication. So that's kind of my thoughts on what's going on. The market's going to be extremely volatile. It's going to take a long time to price everything into the market and all the ripple effects of this. But I think at this point, food shortages are pretty much guaranteed at this point. And I mean, energy prices will be persistently high for the rest of the year. And we're going to need, as we've talked about in previous videos, new players are going to have to come in and supplement those needs. I think if these companies leaving, they're not going to come back. They're not going to go right back. They're gone for years. And this situation will probably keep going on for years. Even if Russia finishes taking over Ukraine, as I said before, this conflict will continue. And I mean, this is just, what a mess. What a mess. Let's hope that we're near the end of the mess and we can at least start sorting out the ripple effects of the problems that we've now unleashed. And hopefully whatever resolution occurs from here leads to the least amount of human suffering as possible. Although I just still have this nagging feeling that we are far from the end of this. So I'll make sure to try to keep you updated. Be sure to check out all the new things that we're going to be doing. Make sure you subscribe. Click that little bell so you don't miss future videos. And I'll see you on Monday morning.